Mental health and wellness are crucial aspects of well-being. Their understanding and acceptance are vital for the progress of society. In a cultural context, mental health is often shrouded in stigma and misunderstanding, leading to a lack of proper support and care for those affected. Heal Your Mind with Tracey-Lee Kotzen is a platform for candid conversations that enlighten and enrich our understanding of mental health and wellness. Join us as we demystify, destigmatize, prioritize, and shine a light on mental health and healing. Heal Your Mind podcast with Tracey-Lee Kotzen is hosted by Mental Wellness Initiative and supported by the Ford Foundation.
Welcome to Heal Your Mind with me, Tracey-Lee Kotzen. Today we're talking about dignity. And I have in studio Jenna Bayer and Ndumi Hadebe. The purpose of a dignity conversation is really because apartheid and colonial systems did not only separate land, labor, and bodies, but it also trained the mind to accept humiliation, silence, and lowered expectation as normal. The episode asks how that inherited wound still lives in families, schools and workplaces, communities and public services, and how restoring dignity becomes part of healing. Jenna is a counselling psychologist and lecturer at Emirates Pretoria. Welcome, Jenna.
Thank you.
And Ndumi Hadebe is the author of Handle Black Tax Like a Pro, a book which I believe is very well timed. And Ndumi is a boundaries and self-leadership coach. Welcome, Ndumi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Jenna, you and I have worked together for some time now, and the topic of dignity really gets you riled up. And we are now sitting on the 2nd of July. We've just come through the March on the 30th of June, where how that March was going to potentially be infringing on human dignities, and the whole discussion around undocumented citizens. So the timing of this conversation is also really, really important, right? But aside from the current upheaval around undocumented citizens, it's not a new thing in this country at all, the violation of human dignity. Yeah. Can you tell me why it matters so much to you?
When I think of this, there's a word that keeps screaming at me all the time, and that word is conditional. We live in a country where, not just for decades, for centuries, so much of our living or people's living has been conditional. I'm only worthy to be here if my skin color's right, or my gender's right, or whether it's an LGBTQ matter, or whatever the place may be. And so when I started thinking about the definition of dignity, there were two words that kept coming up in the definition. That one word is inherent, and the other word is absolute. Now, those two words there are the opposite of conditional. Inherent means it's a given, and absolute means it's not negotiable. It's across the board. And so these systemic issues that are happening at the moment, systemic issues that have happened in our past, and along with personal experiences that I've had as a trans woman growing up hiding, all speak to that thing of, am I enough in this land? When will I be enough? What does it take to be enough? And it's that right to, and it kept screaming at me at this issue of dignity. But to understand this, we have to go back. This wasn't just bigotry for bigotry's sake in the beginning. This wasn't just, I just don't like this person because I feel like it. There was a science to this. And I took this might sound like a strange comment, but I took this personally and professionally. I'm a psychologist, and Hendrik Verwoerd, the architect of apartheid, was too. Imagine being a caregiver and yet you were the architect of one of the most oppressive regimes ever.
Yeah.
Him and Ernest Malherbe in the 1930s used psychometric testing, which was there to test vocational ability, writing ability, language ability, problem-solving ability. They used it, but as a science to justify racial segregation. Remember, the government then couldn't have a situation where there were poor whites because they wanted to create this veneer of white superiority. So what did they do? They used those tests on both poor whites and black people. Naturally, the results were similar, but the interpretation was different. So for white people, they said, no, well, the results were bad because of circumstance and malnutrition and where they live in rural areas. When black people performed poorly, they said, oh, it's because they innately have lower IQs or less intelligent. This was the core manipulation. and the main sort of tool for racial statecraft. And you think of this as one of the preceding factors to Bantu education. So this was all a science that was, and then you could say, well, other countries do it too. Look at America, they do it. Germany does it. So we can justify it. And so this is where it starts. Where it got me is, as a psychologist, when I still listen to stories, I still hear this indignity and this I'm not enough, or this stereotype bias, or white people are naturally smarter, even today. I hear that still today. So, in other words, indignity hasn't changed, or discrimination hasn't changed. It's just morphed into something else. And so that's why I still see it when I hear clients who think, I'm being abused, but this is what I deserve. This is my lot in life. I don't deserve to go to a higher education or a good partner or a good salary. And so this is this prevailing theme of indignity, and this is what I deserve. But that was designed that way because it starts with humiliation, and then it's indignity, and then it's dehumanization. But it was created like this. So that was the birthplace of this. Yeah.
Thank you, Jen. It's fascinating to me that just over 30 years later after the end of apartheid, there are still people who say, well, apartheid is over, and so therefore we should all be, quote unquote, over it. But in fact, the consequences are intergenerational in every sense of the word.
Yes.
And I think, Ndumi, some of the work that you're addressing in your book, and I'll restate the name of it because I'd love for people to go and get this book. It's called Handle Black Attacks Like a Pro. Can you talk me through, you did a lot of research in preparation for this work and looked at some intergenerational stuff, and some stuff around, when we were preparing for this conversation, you'd said something to me about how people feel torn between a loyalty to a family, but also, standing on their own as independent people who've earned their own money. And there's this huge conflict in that, which I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with. Can you talk me through what is it that you found in your research process that links the history of the country to the black tax phenomenon and the sort of current conflict people are sitting in around that?
The interesting thing about this, Tracy, is that this legacy that Jen is talking about is exactly what families, black and brown families, have worn as a decorum of respect. So we don't talk about the things that we are meant to talk about. And I say that it's a legacy that we've inherited because employed leaders, managers, executives feel they are unable to have the conversations with their parents about how they feel about black tax, about money, about people feeling entitled to their money, right? So when we are not having a conversation, something stops there. Means we are a scrum. That's not yielding, that's not progressing to a goal, right? So there's a gridlock that's going on there because we are not getting to a point where we find solutions for this issue that keeps on repeating in families. It is abnormal that a person that is employed keeps on going back, funding their siblings, funding their parents, their relatives. It is abnormal. But it doesn't mean that we need not do it. It means we need to do it differently. Because if we do it the same way that our parents did it, with an assumption that our kids will do it for us, we have a thing coming.
Yeah.
Literally egg to our face because our kids are not going to be here. They're going to be all over the world living their best lives, essentially. So the inheritance here is that I am not able to express how I feel. I'm not allowed. I cannot feel safe to have this conversation. And the reason why we have adopted that is because our parents did not have the conversation with their parents. And I want to also state it clearly that our parents, it's not that they were dumb to not have a money conversation. There was no money to talk about. Cannot talk about a thing that you don't have access to. Cannot talk about financial growth when the system is limiting you in doing that. So our parents didn't have the space. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have the environment that was enabling for them to do that. But we have a different opportunity. We have access to information. We have social media. We have the apps. We have mental health conversations, right? So we are the first generation to actually be sitting in boardrooms where we can influence the direction of the country.
Yeah.
Where we can actually sit in the board of directors or the school governing bodies and change the trajectory of the school. So we need to see the opportunity for what it is, but we don't see it because we are busy catching up.
Yeah.
It's part of that legacy. So our parents, they could only pass on to us a deficit. And that is the legacy of black tax. That is the reality of it. Before we get to the conversation of, oh, should we call it black tax or not? Is it burden or Ubuntu? The reality is that our parents could not give anything else bigger than that. Why? Because they were living through the indignity of being in a country that didn't recognize them as fully human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when will you have the luxury of feeling as a black parent back in the 80s, back in the 70s? Because you have, all you need to do is get by. So we basically inherited a scarcity mindset. No, not exploring solutions for what's presented to us mindset. And a lot of the people that are during the research, in fact, even now, corporates buy most of the book and they give, the copies of my book and they give away to their employees. What I find, there's always going to be one or two people in the conversation or in the audience that's going to say, there is nothing I can do about this. I just got to work with it. And I'm not saying that we need to stop helping our parents. I'm saying we need to do it differently. And also, we owe ourselves and owe our parents the conversation so that black families can grow, so that we can break the cycle of poverty and the cycle of black tax.
Yeah. And so that healing in the economic context of healing conversations can begin.
Absolutely. And Tracy, if we deny the opportunity that there's a conversation to be had with our parents or there's healing to be done, we are basically saying all the atrocities that our forefathers experienced didn't happen. So who are we excusing here in the name of not wanting to actually do the healing?
Yes.
Whether that looks like going for counseling, whether that looks like sitting in a circle as a group of women, men, and just having the uncomfortable conversation. In fact, in the book, I talk about the elephant in the room. Why would black tax be an elephant in the room when the stop orders are going off? We're doing this right at the beginning of the month. People are going crazy. There's the request. There's this transfers. The banks can tell us all about it.
Yeah.
It's right there. There is no elephant. There is just us holding the tension unnecessarily because we don't have the tools to talk about the somewhat uncomfortable conversation.
Yes.
And there's nothing uncomfortable per se other than the truth is hurtful, but also the truth heals.
Exactly. I want to link what you're saying and what Jenna is saying. So when black people are shut out of the economy, when their opportunities to own businesses are exceptionally small, when the communities they could work in and the forms of income they could generate is exceptionally limited, there's a dignity wound there.
Yeah.
And then struggling to provide for family because income is so limited. And not only income is limited, I want to go deeper than that. I want to say, your ability to express your skills, your capability, your intelligence as a human is limited, right? So the humans were limited to how they could express themselves creatively with their intellect, their strengths, their skills, prior to how that manifests in an economic return.
Yes.
On one of the quotes Jenna often raises to make this point, the Verwoerd quote about not needing to teach black children maths because they're never going to use it anyway.
Yeah.
And not because they're intellectually incapable of grasping maths, but because they're structurally limited from roles and positions and access points where maths becomes part of life. So it was so deeply structural. Jen, you can jump in. I just want to round off this point. So we're talking about humans are limited in what they're taught and how they can express, which translates into economic limitation, which is then the indignity. And you are saying, Ndumi, that when we are intergenerationally, creating inheritance for children, the indignity is the thing that's being inherited by children. I wonder then if part of what we're not talking about is, are parents potentially feeling that there is still an indignity because they are reliant on their children for financial support, that they to this day cannot generate for themselves because they cannot go back in time and reattend school. If you're a parent in your 50s and 60s, you can't reverse the Bantu education that you had. You can't go back and necessarily learn the math you were never taught. You know, the limitations are now structural in your life. So is the indignity not in fact still going on because you're now depending on your kid to pay your bills? And I mean, I'm thinking while I'm saying it, I'm feeling it while I'm thinking it and saying it. And that just feels very sad to me.
So the indignity is definitely there, especially for the individuals, the parent that was once upon a time ambitious and they had their goals and that they've not had the space, the capacity to actually grieve their goals. Yes. And now they have to be looked after by their kids. And sometimes because the loving and pure, honest, compassionate conversation is not happening. So parents get the money from their kids. So it's the conversation that's not happening that's causing the indignity. Yeah. Because if there is room to say, Mom, I'm doing this because I know you've gone through so much, so I'm happy to help. There is a free flow. There's an understanding of why we are here, where we are. Also, there's an understanding of the limitation, right? If your child can only give you X amount of money, also parents need to understand that the adult child is also working through their own challenges, of which our parents are usually cut off because they don't have a full understanding of the economic system. Right? They don't understand how loans work. They don't understand, so for them, they just see the figure. They don't necessarily see that for me to get a loan, for us to do a thing that I could have done a year later if we had just saved for it. It means it cost us more as a family actually to do that thing, right? So it's a double-edged sword. And the indignity is in the, I have to beg people, I have to ask for money. There's indignity in that on many levels, especially if there isn't an understanding of the T's and C's of that giving the money. So what parents default to, typically, I'm not saying that all, what they default to is the entitlement. You are my child. I carried you for 9 months, so you owe me. And in the talking about the you owe me, it's because that's all they've got left. Right? So if we came to our parents with a conversation that is open, that is engaging, that is seeking, and by peace, I don't mean that black families are constantly fighting over black tax. The tension is what we need to dissolve. The unspoken thing. That's what's causing indignity here. Because there is the assumption that, mom is entitled to my money. And so is doing this and that to me. In the not getting together to have the conversation courageously and with calmness, not necessarily because we are fighting over money. Yeah. So the conversation is not really about money when you think about it. It's about honoring what our parents went through. And it's about honoring the wounding. It's about honoring the hurts they've experienced and the loss of their goals and dreams and the indignity that comes with having to be a second-rate citizen in this country, in the country where, your own country. Yeah. There is such a big conversation to be had around that as families before we even get to the money conversation, black tax conversation. So that's where the indignity sits. But we are not seeing it because it's too hurtful. So we are running away from the conversation because if we don't talk about it, then it means it's not there.
And also if we talk about it, it unearths decades worth of pain.
That's it.
And then it unearths the pain before the decades between now and 1994. And then the decades prior to 1994, and it's intergenerational pain. When we add it up, we're talking 60, 70 years worth, multiple generations of deep grief. So from a psychological point of view, I can understand why people would avoid this conversation,
Absolutely.
Right? It would be a heartbreaking conversation. But I can also understand from an intergenerational point of view, in order to actually set the next generation free, this conversation must be had. If we don't acknowledge what happened on the level of family, then the wound continues to fester, and then healing becomes really, really difficult. Because then we're just essentially sweeping it under the carpet. Yeah. Jenna, you've got some very strong views on what indignity currently looks like. We're clear on how it looked like during the apartheid years, because it was well documented. What does it look like now?
I'm going to line that answer with this conversation I've just heard, because it is really hits a nerve, really resonating. The phrase you used often was elephant in the room. The elephant in the room, when I think about black tax and the examples you're giving, is the fact that that's how the system was intended in the first place. That being black people fighting over resources. Still, as a white South African, even though as a white South African, there's generational wealth, which means there's less need for that, which means the system continues like that. So if you look at, for example, spatial inequality, when you still have spatial inequality, it's still now the message you're continually sending is your needs don't matter, or your environment reflects your worth.
Jen, can you just explain to us what spatial inequality is?
Well, spatial inequality is if you look at where Santon is, you look at where Alex is, you're talking about the remnants of the past still being visible, and who still has what, and who the gap between the haves and the have-nots. So space in terms of what you have, access to land, building on that land, generational wealth to help you grow that what you have, all that kind of thing. And that's what I mean by the system still working as it was intended. That for me is the elephant in the room. If there's still service delivery failure, that still speaks to the past, because it's still saying your needs don't matter. What happened in the past? We're going to give you less resources because your needs don't matter. It's the same thing. If you still have schools now where are overcrowded, under-resourced, not getting textbooks, the message you're sending is your aspiration ceiling is low. So it's not Bantu education, but it speaks to the logic of it. It speaks to the same thing. So that's why this dignity thing still hits at me, because it's a repeat, but just in a different form.
Yeah.
And mostly why it hits me is because it's in our Bill of Rights, right to dignity. So if you look at unemployment or things like that, that's not just an economic thing. If you've made promises to people and it isn't happening, that's a failure of dignity. It means you said we would get something and we're not. And that's enshrined in the Constitution, which means it's a failure on multiple levels. But the reason is systemically is that's how the system was designed. So there's still indignity. And that's why it gets to me so much, is because it was created like this, just in a different way. And so when you keep having older generations still seeing this, basically you're just re-traumatizing people. You repeat, we might as well get into a time machine and go back to the 1970s. You're just re-traumatizing. So that is why I have to always be cognizant of the privileges I've had. There are many people I know who don't even know what black tax is. Do you see what I mean? But the black tax is symptomatic of survival-based thinking.
Yes.
But again, it was designed that way, to fight for resources, because that's how it was built. And I still see that. And just not being empowered to know your rights. So it's to finish off on this point, this care that I have for this isn't benevolence for benevolence sake. It is a moral duty, because this is, if we don't deal with it, then we're just repeating history. So it's a given. It's a duty we have to do. It's not just benevolence for benevolence sake. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel personally attacked every time I drive over a pothole. And I say it glibly, but it's because every time I see a pothole, I'm reminded of parts of the country where the road is 99% pothole like and 1% tar.
Yeah.
And school children have to walk down this road where electrical cables are in the road, and kids get electrocuted on rainy days because there are puddles and live cables in the streets. And when our electricity service provider for a good more than a decade was really not serving the country well, that's a violation of dignity.
Yes.
That you and I and people with more economic privilege can make a plan. You can order a delivered meal. You can pop across to the supermarket and buy a ready cooked chicken. But for most of the country, it's absolutely not like that.
Yes.
So if the electricity doesn't work, if the water doesn't arrive when you open the tap, there's no alternative for most of the people in the country.
Yeah.
And
not too far.
And not to know, literally down the road, right here. I don't think people grasp of how many people in South Africa still have to walk to a river for water.
Yeah.
It's not an antiquated idea.
What about the kids that still need to swim through a river to get to school? You see, so the indignity in South Africa, it's so nonchalant.
That's a good word for it.
It's so relaxed. It's so comfortable.
Yeah.
It has been so normalized that maybe it was, 10, 11 years ago in Limpopo where there's a grade 1 student died because he fell into a pit toilet.
Yes.
At school.
Yeah.
Like when you think about that, the detail of that, a parent that sends their child to school to start their education. Mm-hmm. And it ends in a pit toilet. I don't know what more descriptive messaging do we need as citizens of this country? Yeah. Because for that to happen at that level, and I didn't follow through with that story, but sitting right here on this day in June 2026, I know nobody was held accountable.
And the thing is,
it's okay. So this is who we've become.
Yeah. I mean, it's not okay, but it's treated as being okay.
That's it.
Yeah.
Right.
But then my bigger picture question, when I think of your examples that you're giving, is what factors or conditions make people forget about the humanity of others in the first place? In other words, why? Because you use that word nonchalant. How have we got to that point of nonchalance? And for me, it's a history of dehumanization and you use that word normalized. That's why and it starts with dignity as a strategy of power.
Yes.
And that goes back decades. So now that's being normalized. There's a difference between normal and normalized. And that's the part that hits me is why have we forgotten the humanity of others? How's that happen in the first place? Yeah.
And then what I understand from you and the history of the country as you described it is that the indignity was a feature of the design. It's not a bug in the system, right?
No,
the system was designed to strip away dignity as much as possible.
Okay.
And then when the system, in terms of actual law, is dismantled, the feature of indignity remained as the flavor of the way our society is structured.
Yes.
Because even when we look at the way our city is laid out, we're in Johannesburg, the townships are positioned deliberately where they are positioned. The more fanciful suburbs are positioned deliberately where they are positioned. The city is designed in a very specific way. So when the apartheid laws come down, Alex doesn't suddenly get picked up off the earth, moved 10 kilometers north into a more favorable position. The roads are not suddenly rearranged so that people have better access to things. The infrastructure of the city that was designed for maximum indignity of black people, but maximum benefit of non-black people, that infrastructure still exists today. We can drive down the street and look at it. And so I'm very much hearing your point about how the indignity is a design. It's a featured design of the system, and it didn't go away when apartheid laws were taken down.
No, with control being the goal.
Yeah.
So dignity is a strategy of power, control, and dehumanization being the goal. Because as Steve Biko said, the biggest, I'm quoting the gist of it. I don't remember exactly, but he said the biggest danger to the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed.
Absolutely.
And so once indignity gets into you and then it's internalized, it becomes easier to control the group that you're trying to control because now it's in you. And so I always have that visual of those two guys seeing that sign, caution, beware of natives. In other words, when you keep reading that sign, what is the psychological impact of that?
Yeah.
even as a trans woman, when I kept hearing the M word, morphe, when I kept hearing that, you just accept this is my lot in life. But I'm naive to the fact that this is reshaping your mind, where shame becomes normalized. And I think that's been taken for granted or hasn't sort of been faced.
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
Ndumi, you said something that was very interesting to me when we were preparing for this. You said that we were gaslit that we were free, but we didn't have the mechanisms for freedom, and we still don't actually have the mechanisms for freedom. Can you step back into that thought process? Because the mechanisms for freedom, for me, also feels like the mechanism for the reclamation of dignity.
Yeah, in the gaslighting aspect of things, I have to obviously honor the fact that life always looks different when you look back, right? So I can have this view now, 30 years later. And I also do acknowledge that people could have been consulted so that dignity and the mindset and the conditioning is addressed. So there is a part of me that actually believes that to not address the mind was intentional. To not address the mindset, that I put you in that small space so that you can believe, so that you can have a small mindset, so that you can have small goals and small dreams, so that you see and feel and live limitation. So that, because you can take me into a small space, but if you are having a different conversation with me, I'm likely to change, isn't it?
Yes.
Right. So that is why exposure always works so well. You know, that when you remove a person physically from that space and expose them to something different, and a different conversation, a different insights, a different belief system, they can believe different. So the gaslighting for me comes in here, where I am made to believe that things are now possible. The policies are a gaslight when they're not being seen through in reality. Right? How right now, entrepreneurship in South Africa is romanticized. Black women empowerment is romanticized. Women empowerment is romanticized, but it's not amplified with sufficient information, education, deconditioning. Right? Because if I believe in from my own background that I am less than, policy means nothing. Me reading a policy that now I have a right means so little because I cannot translate it into my reality. I don't know how that looks like. Right? So the conditioning is the actual gaslight that you are told, you believe something different, you know something different, your lived experience is completely different. But you are being, there's what can I call it? A carrot that's being dangled at you as a possibility. So the gaslight is here in saying we then start to believe that something is wrong with us in not getting to the goal, in not leveraging this empowerment. But how can I be empowered in a world that is so patriarchal, with men that believe that I'm less than, with men that believe that maybe they say they're looking for a wife, but half the time they're looking for a maid. But they don't call it that. Ouch. So this dynamic is a gaslight on many levels, because no one wants to honor your lived experience. So you have to shove it down aside and soldier on. And I use the word soldier on intentionally. Where is the femininity in that? Where is the abundance in that? Where is the freedom in being a soldier?
It's a bit like a Cold War. The conflict is happening, but let's not talk about it.
Absolutely. No one is actually as mind messed up, because I can't use the F word. So soldiers are told what to do. And this is basically how we are doing, essentially. We are soldiering on. So that there lies in the gaslight for me. And so we are free politically, but we are not free mentally. Yeah. We are not free economically. So the two do not match. Yeah. It matters more to, yes, political freedom is important, but I need more economic emancipation. I need more a mindset that's going to say, if I have 1,000 rand, how can I multiply it? Versus how can I spend it? So when we got free, Tracy and Jenna, in my view, is that the rush was for leadership at the time to just empower themselves There wasn't a time for us to look at things, small things like healing, like deconditioning, like true reconciliation through language, for example, right? So we continued having to be the one that learn and master English. And for me to survive and make a real meaningful difference in this country, I need English.
Right.
And white people can navigate with their English without ever having to learn any Zulu.
There's no requirement for them.
There is no requirement, but also there isn't a recognition of what it takes for me to think in Zulu and speak in English. To think in Zulu and write a book in English for black people. You know what I mean? So there isn't an understanding of, like, when you remember the thing called the number line at school.
Yes.
My math is not good. Obviously, I'm better with words, like writing and things. That thing, they teach you 0 to 10 for a long time. Just when you think you get it, then they teach you minors. Black people in this country start at minors. I don't care who says what. Even when they've got money, they've got these other micro aggressions to deal with. So that's the gaslight, the freedom. And now you cannot fight, because what are you fighting for?
Yeah. On paper, everything looks great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But in reality, it does not.
Yeah.
It isn't.
Yeah.
The result is not resulting.
No, the result is not resulting because the conditions, the psychological conditions that was created over decades during the apartheid years, and even before apartheid was formalized, a lot of the stuff was already socialized into the world, right? Those psychological conditions didn't change. Yeah. And so, I mean, I once had a bird and I used to get its wings clipped so that it wouldn't fly around the house. And then the flight wings grew back, but my bird was so used to not flying, it never tried to fly again, even though the flight feathers had grown back. My bird had been conditioned to stay on the ground. Could fly physically, but it didn't know it could fly psychologically.
Absolutely.
Mentally, it was still in a cage. And I think we're just looking, and I say just not to minimize, but we're looking at a case of millions of people in the same situation where the mind is still trapped. And by extension, economic access, by extension, black tax, by extension, feeling unworthy for jobs, for expansion, for higher education. It was still very much in that.
And then the example that's shouting at me when I hear that is this common theme I've had from lecturing, from university students, who still, when they were in high school, they said they can't disagree with a teacher or speak up because that would result in a detention. And so one of the protectors of dignity is psychological safety and critical thinking. And one thing I've realized in my life working with kids and tertiary students is that when a child or a teenager feels that an environment is not one of sanity and containment, they simply won't talk to you. And so when we get to the tertiary level and we're trying to foster debate and critical thinking, it's almost like I'm speaking a foreign language. But it's because of it was psychologically unsafe to do this. Now, the problem is when you have a society where critical thinking isn't fostered, that is one of the beginning stages of indignity, then dehumanization, and then control. That's how it begins. But I don't know if people are aware of this because it's become normalized. But it's just in a different way. And this is a common occurrence that I see is, what is it? Like I'll ask a question and say something like, why do you think this is significant? And you can hear the crickets. Because it's an analysis question. And it seems foreign. So I'm strongly relating to what you guys are saying. Yeah.
So Jen, you're saying even now in education system as it is now,
yes,
there's a lack of encouragement for critical thinking.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it will take another podcast to talk about AI, but I think AI is landing at a not great time for young people developing critical thinking skills, because we already have a deficit in South Africa. But I'm hearing you that if you don't have critical thinking, you can't question, challenge, interrogate a system. You will accept whatever you are told to accept.
Yes.
And so therefore you are easily controllable.
Correct.
Right? And so that is still very much a current outcome of the problems in our education system.
Well, it's this fight for distinctions in high school. And so how you're repeating the past is this continuation of a turf war. So many of you for so little spots. And if you think about it, that's how it was back then. We've got so many of you with so little resources, and the resources are for a select few. So you're just creating another turf war, but in a different way. A, and then B, you saying my worth and my intellectual ability is once again conditional. There's that word again. I'm only lovable or worthy if I get so many distinctions. So you're still perpetuating this thing of conditional thinking, not personal growth, seeing the world around you, connecting. You're still fostering this conditional mentality. You are only worthy or part of the holy grail, as it were, if you do such and such a thing, or if you look a certain way. And so we're just perpetuating it in another way.
So I want to link these things properly. I want to close the loop on this. So you're saying if kids are in pursuit of distinctions and they have to conform to whatever the education system asks of them in order to achieve that distinction, are they sacrificing learning critical thinking in order to conform to get distinctions?
I've seen this on several counts. It's not that I'm saying don't fight for your distinctions. Of course, I want you to do well and cum laude and all these things. The problem is that you strategizing just to fit into a system. So you'll write an exam and learn in such a way to get your distinction. But that doesn't mean you've developed critical thinking. You've just adjusted your thinking style for the system.
For the system, yes.
You see? So, and that's how it was back then. So you're continually having to adjust for a bigger picture, for a system. Yet I say to myself, have we developed the student? You know, you'll get some students who'll, with the way they talk in private and yet the way they'll answer in a test, I'm like, this is not the same person I was speaking to. Whether they were speaking about slavery or whatever the topic might have been. And I'm like, who is this? But it's because they're adjusting to the system just to get what they need. You see, so there's that thing again. I need to get what I need so that I don't fall short or that I have my resources when I get older. So it's the same again, just in a different way.
And perhaps feeling like there's not enough psychological safety in educational spaces in order to actually bring my critical self, my full thinking self.
Or if you say, I don't understand in class in a high performance environment, you might get sniggers. So then you keep it to yourself. The problem with that is that unchecked micro moments become macro moments. Yeah. So then you don't deal with it. And later on in life, whether it's in relationships, in the workplace, I can't speak up because I might get sniggers again, or people might think less of me. Or I can't speak up to my partner because I might get sniggers again. So it's those little micro moments that, if unchecked, become a way of life. And it starts with little moments like that, which means there's no psychological safety. The indignity continues. That's it. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I feel like we need so much more time to work through this. But I want to wrap us up with a perhaps controversial question. But I want to quote something before I ask the question. If fear trains the mind to accept humiliation, silence, and lowered expectations, if that is true, and then we take, Ndumi, you alluded to it earlier, if we take leaders who have been themselves trained in this fear and humiliation architecture that Jenna described, and then comes 1994, and some of those people now accomplish leadership positions, but we have the mind trained for humiliation, trained for subjugation, trained for what the apartheid architecture wanted it to be trained for. And then those minds achieve leadership. And this is, I'm teetering here because it's a very controversial question. What can we expect the outcome of a country to be under those conditions?
It's a sad one to reflect on, because I feel like I really, honestly, maybe I take it for granted. I think some of the solutions could have been looked at critically. You see, so that's the issue. The environment maybe was not enabling for people to actually say, my leadership is not necessarily in leading an organization. Perhaps I need help in the leading this organization. So some sort of skills transfer needed to have happened in my view. But that needs a win-win mindset that requires critical thinking, that requires courage. We spoke about fear. So I'm not a political commentator, but from my assessment, obviously there's white people here trying to protect their resources and their privilege. There's black people now who've received this political freedom, and their background is unhinged. We had to be unhinged to get to what we got to, right? So there's lack of trust. Knowing what I know now, obviously they are not going to get to just overnight with the sense of let's really truly work together, because they are not trusting each other.
Actual Ubuntu.
Absolutely. Right? So there isn't the trust because this party is not trusting this party and so on. So what, in my view, should have happened, which we suggested to my ex-CEO at EdCorp Talent Resourcing, was there should have been a skills transfer in each and every conversation, each and every organization. They retire them if you want. Africans, old white men that have all the wisdom, all the institutional memory, get them to train the younger people across the board so that we've got something to pass on. So right now we don't have quality operational government resources because there was a skills drain because we didn't have that foresight. So fear traps people into humiliation. You're right. Yes. As the quote says. So, but also fear freezes the mind from thinking clearly, and also from, you cannot access fear and love at the same time. You cannot access fear and abundance at the same time. So when you are in the space of fear, you are not able to say, look, my fight was a different fight. You cannot put me into this. That level of insight and self-awareness does not come into play when you're operating, because fear means basically you are an impala being chased by a lion. Right. You are running, right? But also remember there was a chasing for resources. They needed to recover. So the two needed to happen concurrently. But black people don't remember ever being seen. So no one would have actually put the conversation on the table outright, as I've put it. Yeah. Look, you've worked so hard to get to this point, and now how can we make sure that you are handsomely rewarded and you participate in a different way? So they didn't have the honest and transparent and trust necessary conversation. That's what I feel was missing.
So I often wonder if being a very good freedom fighter also makes you a very good politician or not, right? If being a militant person who was doing everything they could to end apartheid in the country also qualifies you to have a government or ministerial or position of high authority from a government point of view. And as someone who has led organizations, my first answer would be no. Because, so let me ask you this. If I'm a very good surgeon, best surgeon in the hospital, will that make me a very good hospital administrator? No, probably not. If I'm a very good mechanic around the cars, does that automatically mean I'm going to be a very good manager at the garage where the cars are coming to be repaired? So I think we missed a translation part of this. And when you develop your skill set, quote unquote, as a function of war or being a freedom fighter, then what do you do with that skill set during times of peace? How does your skill set work when we're trying to build and cultivate peace? And is that mismatch not part of why we're still sitting inside indignity? Because we didn't retrain the minds of our leadership. Ndumi was saying it before, we inherited the mindset, right?
Yes.
So the missed opportunity is possibly that we didn't stop to retrain the minds of our much beloved leadership into actually leading a country in times of peace in a dignified way to create unity We just wrote new policies and dove in as if the policies themselves would
implement themselves.
Yeah.
But the part that sits with me, and I say this as a white South African, is the burden can't always be on people who are historically marginalized to do the psychological work.
Mm-hmm.
That when I hear that comment, that is a heavy burden. That's a heavy burden. And so when there is no intent from historically privileged to make an effort, and when you have people who are still traumatized to then go back to what they experienced, and then nothing happens, you then still have the conditions for dehumanization again, because it hasn't been dealt with.
Yes.
Because you're gonna lead the way you've been taught, and the way you've been taught is survival-based thinking. That's how you've been taught to do it.
Exactly.
So if you haven't addressed it, plus it's heavy to go back and deal with it, you're just going to park it. Plus, sort of old school gender roles are not talking about your showing vulnerability and all that as well. That's going to add to it as well.
Yeah.
So it's just going to perpetuate itself, but in another way, because you're still sitting in the trauma mind, not in the sort of recovery mind. And that's why I think it persists, because there wasn't that redress psychologically. Yeah.
And the vulnerability. Sorry, Tracy. Your point about vulnerability is so understated across genders, across races. And the reason why the leadership could not actually access the self-awareness, it's because of lack of vulnerability. The self-awareness that I may have been an amazing cadre out there when things were happening in action, but I might not have the skills and the tools to lead an organization because I've never led one, right?
Yes.
So vulnerability requires, it's a courage thing, because you have to say, this is how I feel. Oh, Jenna, I need a hug.
Yeah.
That moment is it looks like, oh my goodness, Ndumi is so needy. No, but Ndumi, it just is willing to acknowledge her need right now.
Her humanity.
Yeah.
Or, I do not know how to do something.
Yes.
That requires a vulnerability.
Yes.
A huge vulnerability, especially for men. Right? It's normal for me to be like, oh, I don't know how, what happened to a particular gadget or what's happening.
We're just girls. We don't know how half the
even if the reason why I don't know is dumb. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, we laugh at it. It's cute. We keep it moving. But men needs to, they are always demanded by society to show up as capable.
Yeah.
And have leadership essence. It's afforded to them by virtue of being men. Yeah. Right? So when they don't have it, and we're not going to talk about vulnerability. How are they going to know when they don't know how to translate it into a reality? Yeah. The person might have an intention and the willingness, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they can really get to ROI with it.
Yeah.
So vulnerability is such a huge missing piece in the conversation of dignity, because even when people say, oh, white people, they parent, they do soft parenting, they listen to their kids' emotions. That vulnerability requires you to have some sort of luxury to get into it. Black people have not had the luxury to feel to a point that they can be vulnerable.
Yeah.
That is profound.
Wow.
Vulnerability requires luxury. Wow.
You cannot be hungry and be vulnerable. At the same time.
Because when you're in survival-based thinking all the time, vulnerability feels dangerous.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
Gotcha. Vulnerability requires you to relax. Vulnerability requires me to trust you, that you will not judge me when I ask for a hug.
Yes.
When I say I don't know.
Yes.
So black people running the corporate world right now, they don't have the luxury of making a mistake.
Yes.
In corporate.
Yeah. Wow.
Because they've been set up in such a way that they need to prove that they are worthy to be at the table. They have the skills, they've got the tools, they've got the qualifications. They are literally moving with the freedom that is there politically, but in the actual boardroom, it's that I need to show up as perfect as possible. My work must be seamless so that you don't think that I'm like the rest of inverted commas of the people that cannot perform.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the vulnerability I'm talking about. Yes. So it takes vulnerability for me to say, look, I do not know something. I need help with something. Whilst for a white woman, typically it's afforded to them.
Yeah.
It's given. Their not knowing is justified. My not knowing is not justified.
Wow.
So between feeling unsafe, unable to be have your weaknesses exposed, because vulnerability would require that. Yeah. Having to fight extra hard for a seat at the table and then prove yourself on repeat. Those definitely do not create the conditions for a person to relax and sort of trust the system or trust the process. And so it very much sounds like still survival mode, right?
Absolutely.
So I think, I wish we had more time. I really do. But we have to wrap up. This conversation is fascinating to me. I think we could be here for a long time.
Yeah.
Let's end on a note of hope. Jenna, what would you think is critical for us to turn things around from restoring dignity in this country?
For me, is to create the conditions in a multidisciplinary way to protect dignity. So for us to identify the conditions where we think dehumanization is going to happen, and then we create the conditions that's going to stop that. Whether it's compassion, critical thinking in schools, psychological safety in schools, just listening to your child, justice, accountability for wrongdoers, that type of thing. If there's obviously a lack of accountability, obviously empowerment through education, so people can identify it and fostering that from a young age. But I would say the number one thing is for people to feel free to speak their truth, and for people to see a change in the infrastructure. So, because when you keep seeing it, when it's the same all the time, then you're still seeing indignity.
Yeah.
So for me, the number one thing would be then accountability.
And you're starting to create a dignity movement. I know you're in the early stages of it, but you're starting to build the moving parts of a movement to take this conversation nationally and perhaps even internationally.
Yeah. So the aim of the movement is to protect the conditions under which people become vulnerable to dehumanization again. That is the core of it, because we've seen throughout history how ordinary people can be capable of cruelty when dignity is stripped away from others. We've seen that. And so when people feel humiliated, violated, just not heard, their vulnerability grows, and that creates the conditions for fear and division and those types of things. So before we get to that point again, which we've seen in this country before, this movement wants to just create
interrupt those conditions.
We want to interrupt those conditions where we protect dignity so that it doesn't happen again.
Got you. Yeah. Thank you. Ndumi, in your view, what would we need to do to turn the ship around for the country and restore dignity to all of our people, be they documented or not, be they South African born or not? Everyone who wakes under this sun and this sky deserves dignity. And what do we need to do to restore that?
So my favorite social commentator and broadcaster, Eusebius Makaiza, used to say, we can chew and walk at the same time. Two things can be truthful at the same time. And with everything going on in society right now, in our country at the moment, I feel like we need to be aiming for win-wins, but the win-wins have to be true. It is possible for us to progress whilst we are holding up the law, right? It is possible for us to fight for documentation of illegal immigrants without causing violence, right? So that requires us in itself to step into each and every situation. Where am I limiting myself? Instead of saying, I can do this, and I'm saying it's either this or that. So critical thinking is so important. But people need to just go for healing in this country, blacks and whites, because a lot of whites actually hold the shame of being the beneficiaries of apartheid in some shape or form, right? And whatever else that's going on there. But I wouldn't get into the conversation because that's not my lived experience. So what I advocate for is real healing at an individual level, at a family level, at an organizational level, at a community level. And we just honor it, because if we don't go through our healing, we are basically saying that history did not happen. Atrocities didn't happen. Effects and impacts didn't happen. So when we honor the room for healing, we honor possibility for us to access the truth, for us to access critical thinking, for us to access courage, but most importantly, to access love and compassion.
And that is a perfect note to end on. Thank you both for a really rich, beautiful conversation.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you all, and go well.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Appreciate it.
That's all right.
Heal Your Mind podcast with Tracey Kotzen is hosted by Mental Wellness Initiative and supported by the Ford Foundation.